So I know you know a lot of people in the room.
I do know a few people in the room from way back, and also
For us newbies that are just getting to know you,
yes.
Could you start by just telling us a little bit about your journey in art and some of your earliest memories?
Oh, well, I'll start, I'll make it a little bit short, because it's a long, complicated journey. But, I was a sort of a child artist. I was never really good in school with academics or math and spelling especially, but I could draw, and I always just felt that that was something that I was supposed to be doing. But I also grew up around artists and creative people, and had all this support as a young person to keep doing that, which a lot of people who have talent, they don't get that extra support. So I had an extra bit of that growing up. And some really good art teachers in high school and even in grade school back in the 50s and 60s, so I just continued with that. I actually had a small studio when I was in high school in a room that I commandeered beside our house. And I did some work in it. So I was serious as a young person.
And you also spent a lot of time growing up with your godmother, who was an artist.
Yes, my godparents, Louis and Elsie Friend, and Elsie showed work here as a jeweler on St. Armand Square back from the 50s all through the 60s and into the 70s. I can't remember the name of that, but she was a founder of the Florida Craftsman Group, and they both taught at Stetson University in DeLand. And they were childhood friends of my father's. And so it was sort of a real family thing, not just godparents, but real things. So an extra little bit there. So I was able to be around real artists from a young age till they passed away a few years ago. So very, very lucky.
That's awesome. So you also grew up spending your time partially between the Ozarks and Daytona Beach, two completely different landscapes. How do you think the variety really influenced your creativity and your outlook?
I was, sort of first really influenced by the ever-present horizon line that you have when you live by the beach in Daytona. So a lot of my work has a sense of space and that horizontal line going through it. And it's all from growing up in Daytona. And then the Ozarks, which I didn't really realize how much the terrain there was affecting me as an artist with the limestone formations and all of that. And that's where a lot of this, the places are a bit of an abstraction of those rock formations, which are always just very inviting. Just wrap your arms around some of these rocks sometimes. So this is a little harsher, but still there was that part. But I'm an artist who doesn't just work in the same, I work in the same style, but different subject matter, like way different. Deserts, beaches, and faces of places, which is an offshoot of some other things. So it's very late, so I won't get into all the details, but it might be, how about that?
Absolutely. So a super pivotal time in your career was the summer of '67 you spent in Woodstock, New York.
Yes.
And I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about that journey and the art scene and the cultural scene that was going on there.
Well, there's one other thing I remembered, and this is very important. This was the year before Woodstock, '66, after I got out of high school. I went to New Orleans by myself for a whole month. And all I did was draw there. And I was inspired by my godfather, Louis Frank, because I got to paint with him as well as just being a person and somebody who supported me. So I sort of took off from what I'd learned from him and went to New Orleans and spent that month every day just drawing buildings from the French Quarter. And then the next summer, I discovered that there was an Art Students League in Woodstock, New York. I learned that from a guy I was working with at the A&P in Daytona, and he had been to the art students group, and he told me, listen, if you want to be an artist, you got to go there. And they had a summer school, and I wrote a letter, and they wrote me back. This was like the letter writing days, and they said, come up early, and you can help get the studios ready for the rest of the summer, and we'll pay you a little bit. So I did, and Woodstock, and plus Bob Dylan was up there, so what could be better? And so there was this whole mythology about that, on top of being accepted to the Art Students League. And really being part of the artist colony that Woodstock was from the early 1900s. Still other artists living there, and so not just going to school, as just a student from somewhere, but really being able to be introduced to the whole community, visiting practicing artists, old artists, widows of dead artists, and all people who had also been in the New York scene, and a lot of the abstract expressions painters and people who were studying that were up there. So it was just super, summer for me that way. And Jackson Pollock had one of the first big retrospectives that summer at the Museum of Modern Art. So I went there and I saw this work in person, and I was like amazed by the energy from it. Not necessarily this way of painting, but you could just feel that energy on that. So, and then I came back to Daytona only for a little while, because while I was in Woodstock, I worked with another young artist. We worked together on a lot of stuff, and he was already going to school in Philadelphia at the Philadelphia College of Art, and he told me about the Pennsylvania Academy of Art. So I applied there, and I got in by the 1st of January, 1968, and stayed in Philadelphia after going to the Pennsylvania Academy until 1980. Both of the two schools, the Art Students League and the Pennsylvania Academy, were really old school, and it was mostly all practicing artists who were instructors there, and mostly critique and mostly working and seeing how they were working instead of formal classes and stuff like that. And the Art Students League traded instructors sometimes with the Pennsylvania Academy. So even after going to the real Art Students League at the Academy, some of that same energy was like transferring back and forth. So I studied with Will Barnett, was one of the artists that really made a big impression on me when I was at the Academy. Others too, but we had a kind of a connection going. Then I ended my days working as a graphic artist at Drexel University. I somehow finagled a job there. After learning picture framing, and we worked for a shop that framed work for the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and big time work, and it was all real archival. I always wanted to learn almost everything I could about the art world, working in galleries, and picture framing, and a lot of photography. I had this sort of parallel way of working, and parallel, I don't know if let me see, how would I phrase that, but just almost another career. I don't think of myself as having a career, but I did have a little photography life. Yeah, and then I came back to Florida in 1980 and sort of immersed myself in what was going on down here. I moved to Orlando and taught photography at the Crealde School of Art. And then I had an eight-year watercolor class that I taught at the Maitland Art Center in Maitland, Florida. And I also house painted and did whatever, which you're always like hustling that once you really need it. And I've always been interested in publications and layout and commercial art, and kind of blending that and taking a little bit of all these disciplines and putting it in to really what this show has become. So you can't really see that exactly, but I can how you connect, if you ask.
Well, so obviously you're an artist, you've been a teacher, but you were also a curator for 20 years.
Oh, that part, yes. I had Christine's job at the Museum of Art in DeLand, Florida, back, about 4 years ago. I was a curator. And so I learned all about, hanging shows and installation and things like that. When I moved back to Florida, I opened a gallery. And it was on the second floor. And it was the kiss of death. But they discovered me from the museum looking for somebody to install a show there. And they called me and I left. And I got to work with George Bolgi, who's a famous, well-known director from the Fort Lauderdale Museum and also the Boca Raton Museum. Very great person. Those were the glory years. He came later, and was the director for the last 8 years that I worked here. So that was fun. That was all this huge, big experience of being able to see other artists work and really get up close and meet them, channel that into, not directly, but of course it all becomes part of it. And then the lucky part is that I had a studio, which I still have. I've been in for over 20 years. And it's very close to the museum. So the whole time I'm working at the museum, I'm painting. I did photography, commercial photography and fine art photography and wedding photography for a long, long time. And it sort of bled into my first years at the museum, which was just part-time. So I was still doing photography. But when the digital age hit totally, and digital photography really overtook film photography, I sold all my equipment. I went back to painting. So I've been painting straight for about 20 years now. And a big work, all this work sort of began in that time period, but as big paintings and oil paintings and things that would take me months and months and months to do, just working after work and on the weekends. So it was sort of the perfect job. It's my only other job besides my job at Drexel when I was a graphic artist. Everything else I don't care.
Well, so I've known you now for about 3 years, and I've seen a lot of variety in your work, but it's always been super whimsical. There's a lot of movement happening, even in the backgrounds. And so with this show, you shared with me that you were really looking back on some of your older work. And so I'm just wondering, what was that process like in developing this body of work, and what inspired you?
Oh, well, okay. I have been showing different work and at different jury shows over the last 3 years here, and showing a little bit of everything that I've been doing when I was still being curator and painting. So I was sort of showing a lot of that work for the very first time. Although the heads actually started about 20 years ago, I did have a show of these, some of these actual heads in a different medium. And then this all sort of came from that. But after showing work here, getting to know the Art Center, and Philomena was actually the one who introduced me to the Art Center here, because she was at an exhibit, the last exhibit that I did in DeLand when I was curator. She was part of that. I was from the ACA Gallery in New York, and we borrowed work, and she made the poster for the show, and we got to meet. That was during COVID, so we just met, with masks and stuff. But then I found out she was having a show here, and I came down to see the show, and I got to, meet the staff, and Christina, and become familiar with the Art Center, which they're doing a great job here, I think, because I know about that, all that work in the art world too, which is good. So I finally asked her, after I was here for a while, I said, what about a show? And she said, well, write me a proposal. So I wrote a proposal, and I got my old boss, George Bolgi, to write an essay for me about that, which is very difficult to understand, but it's interesting. So when he wrote this, the first proposal was peculiar portraits. When he saw the portrait work, he called it Faces in Space. So we changed the title to Faces in Space. Then talking to Christina, she said, well, the faces are nice. And those were just preliminary drawings and some other older work. And there's maybe some new work, like really new work. Okay, I guess I could do it. She suggested, Christina suggested that we do something else besides faces. So I said, okay, we'll do faces and places in space. And that was too long to say, so it became Faces and Places. And then I started working. This whole show I did in 3 months. Concentrated effort. And it's all based on the previous 20 years, actually, of working, sometimes in this kind of style, along with the beaches and deserts and some other things that I do. So that was a real challenge. And they accepted the proposal, which was always a good sign, because a lot of times you are not accepted. And as an artist, you get used to that. You get pretty used to that. It was kind of a surprise, but I thought, what can I do? So the first thing I did is I did a floor plan of the gallery space. And to scale, and I figured out the sizes of the work that we were working with the two big pieces sort of anchoring the show. One face and one place big, and then working it down. And the sort of the natural division of this gallery was a real help, just to formulating the structure of the show. So there's 8 paintings of faces and 8 paintings of places, and 6 drawings of each one. I think it's 6. I think it's 6.
So it does mean that we have to learn math.
Well, you do, sort of. Well, this is like plain geometry. So that's what I could do math-wise in school. I thought, wow, this is easy. It was all to scale, figured it out, just so I could get the sizes. And then once I got the sizes, I had to figure out what to fill those sizes with. And I had a general idea. So I started drawing. I thought I always draw everything out, every painting, nearly every painting I do, as at least one drawing, and usually a huge series of drawings leading up to it, because I'm trying to be perfect. In a loose, tight way. I sort of describe my style sometimes as being loose, tight. It's got the distance, it's got a sort of tight, feel to it sometimes. But when you get up close, the edges are sometimes a little fuzzy, and I do that on purpose. I'm kind of a natural person with, an artist with composition. And with that, it's just an instinct. I put a little academic, polish on it, and really kind of bring it up to snuff. So, I started on the 1st of June doing the drawings, and got through this, and then and I just somehow I got done. So should I go into more detail?
I think it's incredible that you started and finished this from June to September.
Well, there's the magic of acrylic too.
Well, that's another thing that's really inspiring is given your long history and experience, you actually were experimenting with this show.
Oh, this show was a whole new avenue of, direction. With familiar imagery, but the application of doing the show completely changed. And it started with these drawings, because all I really wanted to have was a nice contour drawing of the image, and then put that on the canvas and then fill it in. But the drawings, in order to get there, and to make the drawings, I went back to all this old work. So some of this work is based on just details of larger paintings, just going in there and finding some other places that were working. And some of the faces I sliced and I diced. So I cut stuff up and I utilized the iPhone and my printer at home to get the imagery down. And then I traced over that with vellum. But not just, and then I started doing color pencil behind the vellum, and then the vellum started to have this extra dimension to it, and this transparency and this layering. I was almost tempted to call that the show and just keep doing that. But I really wanted to do the paintings, plus I already had the cubism. I was locked in. So that became a whole new avenue just to get to the line drawings that became the pattern for the bigger paintings. And then once I got that finished, I started the paintings. Once in a while, I use a grid method, but what I did is I used an opaque projector and did the drawings onto the canvas that way. I discovered the acrylic paint pen, and I also discovered zinc white as a white to use, and that's how a lot of these the layering and the work of the background of this work is a lot of that zinc white. And then I discovered carbon black, and these are all golden. This is the golden color, so those are the best parts. So there's a lot of Payne's gray and a lot of carbon black over the black part of these paintings. So, and the acrylic paint pen is the drawing part. But even in those cases, some cases I go with that with actual paint. So it's really kind of something I've been trying to figure out how to do for a long time, and that's blending drawing and painting together in some way. And this show actually was the catalyst for being able to do that. And as I was drawing them, I was thinking, this is really being very satisfying. And so I normally would just do an outline and then I would start painting. I knew I didn't have enough time to do that. But the drawing in the background became good enough and fascinating enough that I thought, I'm going to do this. So a whole other avenue of what I had originally planned for the show to be, which is not a hard plan, but a pretty good plan, but with allow myself to be, manipulative or find a new road that looked like it was going to be nice. So then I had to decide what to do with the background colors. So it was a real step-by-step process. I was unusually disciplined for me, but I had the time and I had the finances to do it and stuff, so I went ahead. But I after the drawing part got on, I figured out the background. And the first background was for the heads, and I chose a kind of a purple tone to it, just as a sort of a royal tone and sort of a tone of power and prestige and stuff like that. But not all the same. Everything's different, and leaning toward the blue. And then just to balance that off, I came up with this reddish background. All very experimental, all that. And that's what goes back to really my late 60s time when I was doing big color field paintings. Mostly solid color, but the background in these paintings are all deep glazes and many layers of paint to give it that sort of visual depth and the feeling of that, and make it more interesting. And then there's real painting. So there is real painting in this. So
Well, so in your artist statement, you mentioned that the work is really closely tied to cubism and abstract illusionism. I think most of us can relate to what cubism is, but what would you say abstract illusionism is?
Well, it's a term it's a real term, and it's a short version of post-cubist abstract illusionism, which I first named this style of work because I love words and I love joke and just stuff like that. Yeah, abstract illusionism is what it's about. It's really about the illusion of space, but not deep space, but a space, space. But so when you see this work, you can visually go behind stuff and come out. I also sometimes think of it as Escher light. So there's a lot of confusing perspectives going on and different perspectives within the same painting. So all that is on purpose to give the viewer, give the person who's looking at it something to see while they're there, something to get involved with in a very light kind of way, not in a really challenging way. So I think. So that's that's kind of it. I think I'm leaving things out, but you get the idea.
Absolutely. So you mentioned earlier Jackson Pollock was an influence, Will Barnett, and the color field painters. Are there any other artists that specifically maybe inspired this body of work?
Not really this body of work, but I always go back to Thomas Hart Benton, who's also from the Ozark area, Missouri, and did a lot of painting of that terrain and stuff like that. But I really loved his work, and I kind of studied his method of teaching. He was the instructor at the Art Students League, famously teaching Jackson Pollock, and a very controversial figure. But as a painter and a mural painter, his work is just super powerful. And if you've seen it in person, I've seen any of the Thomas Hart Benton murals, you can just, there's a great visual story going on there. And in the murals of his, he does all this multi-perspectives within the same thing, but in a realistic manner. So that's a similar way. But I always remember as a painter, the only thing, and I teach a drawing class, and other classes that I teach, I remember, the one thing I remember from Thomas Hart Benton is that dark supports light. You just have to remember that. If you remember dark supports light, you're like, more than halfway there. And I always have that in the back of my mind, as simple as that is, but, as one shape comes up against another shape, and one area of the painting, is up against another one. You think about that, it keeps everything rolling into each other, and keeps it cohesive in a certain way, and supportive. It gives the whole thing much strength. I'm about that. I like to, this is a painting, yeah, this is it, and make that obvious, but not like, in your face. It's just something that people feel when it's
So we've had a lot of visitors come in, and everyone's really enamored by the work. But their first question to me is, are these self-portraits?
The answer is yes, but not on purpose, and not consciously that way. But it's sort of it's just kind of the way that I work. But they come out they just come out that way, and I'm fine with that because I don't have to be exactly knowing anatomy. I never had that super realism way of working. Although I did some photorealistic work back in the 60s and early 70s. But, and this, they are that, and they're also, I like to try to convey some mystery and a little bit of androgyny and just, nobody's really looking at anything particular. There's sort of a mysterious presence to some of this stuff, but it's friendly. I think most of it's friendly, except for maybe this guy. And I changed the titles around so much I can't remember sometimes. But the ones for this show are kind of final titles. Yeah, they are sort of self-portraits. I I just can't get away from it.
Well, the titles are great. I mean, just in the portraits alone, your adjectives are sensitive, volatile, precocious, and potential, among others.
Yeah.
So are these sort of like dreams of yours or ambitions?
No, it's very dry. It's very, what I did is, the drawings came first, then the paintings, and then the titles. And really what happens is I wait for the piece to be finished, and then I look at it and I try to figure out, what's the title of this, what could be a good title. And I use the thesaurus regularly in general, but particularly for this show. So sometimes I do come up with something that I can't remember, but if it's written on it, that's what it is. Yeah. So I try to be, I try to have a two-word title for everything, but sometimes I can't quite do that. So I'm trying to make those 2 words really be, descriptive of the work and also maybe be a little mysterious and a little playful. And one more thing, not just the title. I want it to be a little bit more than just the title.
Well, so we talked about the portraits a little bit, but then we have the places, and you have a really distinct use of negative space in these that you're not as much using over there. So where are these cities, where are these landscapes coming from?
Well, these are coming from the Arkansas experience a little bit, but they're also coming from, I almost had the architect's gene, the architectural gene. I have a little bit of it. And so it's a little bit of architecture, it's a little bit of landscape, and it's just a little bit of pure, abstraction. But landscape and architecture are part of this, and machinery and stuff like that. So it's all. And I want to be very enigmatic. That's another word I was thinking of earlier. And the portraits have that enigmatic quality, and these have that enigmatic quality. I try to have that. It's purposeful. I'm not sure how it works all the time, but it's part of the process. Beyond just the application of paint. And really exciting. So this has really opened up a whole new thing for me. This whatever this is.
Well, they definitely have like a sci-fi kind of feeling.
Yeah, they do. And that again, none of this is like on purpose so much. And I'm not a huge comic book fan, although Art Crumb, the illustrator from the 60s and 70s, is one of my heroes in terms of drawing. And really, his style of drawing, if you know it, it shows up in here. And it's just basic, cross-hatching and stippling. I ended up being a sort of a maniac stippler with this show, all these dots and stuff. And in my drawing class, we talk a lot about that. And I had a student last year who just, when she discovered, the stippling, that she was like, all right, and that's it. So it just accidentally turned out that the shading and all that is. And plus, it's the balance of that negative space, like we're talking about. Within the structure, this is a little bit of texture.
Well, you mentioned to me, you're a former hippie, or still a hippie, I don't know. But, so Grateful Dead's Touch of Grey.
You
wanted to talk a little bit about your Touch of Grey.
Yeah. So within this work, first glance it's black and white with a color background. And so, all this work is about, it's about each other itself. Everything relates. This is like a purpose show just for this space, actually. What was the question?
The temporary.
Oh, the subject. So as I was going over toward the end, it was very satisfying just to have the lines on there with the acrylic paint pen. But within a few places, I decided just to put a little neutral gray. Because this is a show of contrast, like high contrast and very subtle contrast. So I put these little touches of gray that are really imperceptible in a kind of way. If you're a painter, I'm kind of a painter's painter, and so you can maybe see that. But that just gives it a little bit more volume. Just these little bits of gray that you can't even give you sense. You don't really even see them. And so I worked on that. And that's a little bit of my commercial art background, I think, coming in there. Just little things, you know, that make the whole piece a little bit more interesting. I think it does. I'm sure it does. For me, it does.
And so, out of all the faces and places, do you have a favorite?
I kind of don't. All of the faces I do on the Dream Reader, and that was one of the first drawings. There's about 6 or 7 versions of that, and this is the last version. And this is in a way kind of my favorite one, in a way. But I don't really have a favorite one. It's funny too because I do have a sort of value that I place on work. The ones that I was thinking were the lesser, sort of became the better ones in a way, like this landing pad. I wasn't even sure about that, of putting it in and doing it. But I did it, and then when I finished it, I thought, oh, I like that. But I have some flat stuff going on and some other things. So, yeah, that's a tough question.
So you remarkably made this show from June to September.
Yeah.
What is next?
Well, I'm going to be in the DeLand Fall Festival of the Arts this year as an outdoor show, my local outdoor show. And I want to keep experimenting with this drawing technique, and also with these kinds of paintings, even going into some other things, like still lifes and actual scenes, but maybe not. I'm not sure. I'm really kind of liking this sort of the beginning. So I'm hoping that I do continue. There's 2 pieces that didn't make the show, but they're drawn. They're partially drawn and they're ready to go. And I'm going to work on those next as soon as I recover from this summer, which wasn't too bad, but. Yeah, I think that's the next thing. I will mention one more part of the show, and that's the framing part. And for me, framing is very important, not only to protect the piece, but in this case, I traded another painting with a friend of mine to cut all this molding, and I was going to do like another, like a more traditional frame, where these paintings were floated. Usually that's what I do, I float. I cut all these frames and I cut them just a little bit too small. But luckily, when we cut the molding, we had all these inner strips, this like lattice work, but it's wide. So I went back and I used that as the framing for the paintings. So it's just stripping. But really, it turned out to be working better in a way for me with the work, because it continues that line. It's part of the painting, it's a frame, but it's not a frame on a painting or a painting in a frame. It's kind of everything together. And it was much easier. You do have to be careful when you do this, though, because you want to make sure that those edges on the outside, when you're looking at the work, are the solid strips. Because these aren't minor, these are just butted up against each other. So yeah, that's just a little trick I wrote back somewhere. I probably learned that from Socrates Caracas. That's who I worked for in Philadelphia at the frame shop. And he had worked for Kulik, and Kulik was the big New York painter who invented the metal section frame. So that's just a little aside. And then we got regular, we got real frames for the smaller drawings. So I mean, just a smaller profile, just a little bit less deep. So I was able to utilize that mistake.
So it's kind of funny because it's like a happy accident, which sort of seems like your whole vibe in creating. You're doing everything sort of intuitively. There's a plan, but there's not a plan. But I love your whole like reason to be is drawing.
Drawing is sort of the basis of everything that I do, including photography. I always think of that, and then painting and other things come after that. So this was that way of really bringing drawing off of paper, which you normally see or something, marks on paper into canvas. So I got that blend that I was looking for, or thinking I was looking for. And also as an artist, you're always sometimes wanting to do new work and saying you want to do new work, but it's if you're doing something over time and you get good at it, it's sometimes hard to move on to something else. It's not like a giant move, but it's a progression. It's a difference, and all that other work just it's a great foundation. The first work, I kind of worked backwards with this series in a way with the heads. I did these big, format paintings, 4x4 oil paintings. If I put all the work together, this will almost look like the preliminary work with the bigger work. And I love all that, all those little subtle things that run through, being an artist, aside from the studio, alone in the studio, painting every day. That was. I think that's almost the whole story, almost. I think.
Well, so we'll open it up for questions in just a second. But I have one last question for you. Somebody coming into the gallery viewing the work, what is the lasting impression you want to leave with them?
I have a real reason for what I do, besides just for the love of doing it. I like to have something very positive to say or deliver some sort of a positive vibe. No political axe to grind here. And it's, I really hope I can engage people visually to get involved with painting. I also wanted to do something that I don't see as a curator. And I did a fair amount of judging and still do sometimes. So I see all this work. And I see a lot of the same kinds of work everywhere by everybody. So I wanted to be sure that what I was doing was different from that in some way. And this show was part of that. And even when I started painting 20 years ago after not doing photography, but I always painted. I was always doing painting sometime or another. When I started painting full time, I wanted to do something that I hadn't seen. And that's another thing. So it's not only giving me something new to be involved with, but for people in general, people who know my work too, who see this as different, but related. But for people who don't know my work, I'm hoping they haven't seen it. Have you all seen anything like this? I haven't, so that's kind of what it is. I want people to sort of think about things, or at least sort of have some sort of a feeling of space and basically just that, and movement. And if you're another artist and you get close, you can get involved. I'll tell one more thing about the work if we have time. If you notice, the background is more painted. It's like very painterly. So I got my painterly, thing going with doing that. But within the work, there's a matte medium that I mixed with the paint, so there's a little bit of a sheen on there. But the drawing part, the faces and the places themselves, don't have a medium with them, so they're a little bit flatter. The black has medium in it, so that's that. So there's another little subtle thing going on between flat, surface and feeling, and this little bit of a sheen going on at the background. And all that is sort of playing with each other. All the black, there's 3 layers of black on it. There's the black from the acrylic paint pen, just roughed in. And then I go over that with the Payne's Gray, which is a real sort of a transparent black. And I always leave a little bit of an edge of some of that showing through, and then over that black, that carbon black went on there. And that really brings the black out. So I'm hoping that the painting kind of emerges out of the canvas and is part of the canvas, and not just on the canvas. And that's part of it, the illusionism part of it. And to get that, you sort of have to work with those little subtleties. It's all kind of theoretical. I think I might work sometimes. Okay, that's all I have to say. Any questions?
Well, it's super compelling and it's wonderful, so congratulations.
Oh, well, thank you. Oh, question, yes, sir.
Do you start each painting from start to finish, or do you have several working consecutively at any given time?
In this case, I did that. I did work on several consecutive, together at the same time. Usually I do, the bigger paintings, I always finish one before I start another one. But this way I really was able to, work off of what I just finished and make it all kind of relate at the same time. And I did it kind of in stages. It's almost production work in a way, which I hate to say, but to make it be this whole show. That's what I had to do. I also convinced myself before I started doing 30 paintings, or 30 to begin with. I said, well, I'm not doing 30 paintings, I'm just doing, or 30 pieces including the drawings. I'm just doing one big painting every summer, so I could do that, just one big painting, with little, parts to it. But yeah, I do that, and I always work, whatever painting came here, the next one, I always relate to that one in some way or another, just a little bit. So there's a bond that way for it. And really, I had to sort of work on all that to make this work fit. So yeah, and then I divided everything up with that symmetrical, part of the show equally, which is a good sort of format for the color and transposing. And all the canvases are the same size except for one little one up there. And the only difference between the heads are that they're all in the vertical, and the places that are the same size are on the horizontal. So another one of those little subtle things that just, I hope ties it all together. So it's a group of single paintings, but it's also a specific sort of piece just for this space. Quality. And then we'll change. Is that more than you asked for?
Got a few more.
I wouldn't expect it any less.
Oh, okay.
One of the things that impressed me was your forwarding of cubism.
Oh, okay.
Because it's such a distinctive style.
Yeah.
And here it's so subtle in terms of, and you can relate to, or I can relate to the rock formations of Appalachia, influencing it, and then this mechanical overlay of steampunk abandoned factories.
Yeah.
So kind of the idea.
That is something I think about a little bit.
But the other thing that you've done is pointillism.
Yes.
Which is, again, not something, I mean, there are the schools now, but this is black and white and gray.
Yeah.
So that's pretty inventive and interesting to see the cubism and then the shading and the shaping, so it becomes both sensuous and hard at the same time.
Very nice. That's a good observation.
You want to quote me in your... So I found that very interesting because I really love cubism, but it is such a hard medium and it is kind of relegated to history.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
And it's that whole period of the experimentation in painting in the early part of the century is just amazing how it's hard to find something new to do. So I really like that for this, which is, I saw something that, yes, I can see where the background is and the history, but I also see a step forward or a step around it.
Okay. Yeah, this is on tape, isn't it? Yeah, those are good observations there. When I'm always looking for these, tricky terms and stuff, and I really didn't come up with post-cubist abstract illusionism, which I had to write on the studio wall and practice for
Think
6
about
months to be able to say it. And then we shortened it to abstract illusionism. But I still use that other term if I need to, in certain places.
Well, I think that was a real foundation in cubism too, was not creating so much an illusion as creating the reality, but all at once.
Yeah.
And that's a very creative thing to do.
Yeah. And my favorite, I always liked Picasso, of course, but I also like Juan Gris' work. That's another. And this is kind of related more to his style. And George Braque, who's also, when I was in high school, I was studying these guys.
Picasso always liked Braque better.
Yeah. So there is that. And it's sort of accidental, because I do other, but it's always, I think that a little bit of that has always been in my work.
And maybe it's a part of the fact that it's based in a drawing, because I see that kind of interpretation more in drawing. I mean, you have the very sensual three-dimensionality of painting.
Right.
Although in acrylics, it's much more abstract and hard edges. So it's just very, I was very struck by this. The whole, the whatever limitations of putting your show together have, more.
I love to fight against limitations. I try to, in my class, my drawing class, we start with the basic shapes. And the basic shapes are all part of this work. You see, just like little elements of the composition. And that all just started to happen. But I always think, as important as those shapes are, and as heavy symbolic meaning that they have, they're really a design element,
right,
in a way, but very simple. And I try to basically work within the basic, basic colors. But I love black and white and I love graphic, just that. So actually blend. I wasn't sure if it was going to work. When I first, did this work, it was faces in space. For a second, and not too seriously, I thought I could do it on black velvet. And I did envision all this work with a black background first, and then a gray background. So I really had to work up to what it became.
Isn't that the process?
That is the process, yeah. And then I thought it enough to believe in it, and then I just kept going with it. And then I worked on the big ones first. The big paintings, I wanted to get them done, but I did go back and change colors as I was working on all this.
Only once?
Oh no, all over the place. Yeah.
I think Davey has a question.
Oh yes, Danny, yes.
I sure do.
Yes, I do.
So, based on what you said about resolving everything in the smaller drawings and then working on the paintings, do you find in the studio while you're working on the larger work that you're like a little less conscious? Are you focused on mark making? Do you listen to music? What is that like? Since you've got the image as a reference.
I listen to music a lot while I work, and I feel a real connection between music and painting in general, but particularly with my work. And that's what I love about an image and doing an image over and over again. A lot of people don't want to do that. Artists want to just move on. But it's like a good song. A good song you can hear like 1,000 times. And I want a good drawing or a good painting to be able to be interpreted, the same image, but being interpreted differently as it goes along. And all that, builds up to something, and something finished. But I keep the drawings up, and refer back to the drawings, I refer to the whole thing as I'm doing the whole, concept of the show. So it really was that feeling of this being one thing, and always going back to those drawings to see if I was on point with them, and making a change or two when I needed to, if I felt like I did. So when you scale a small drawing up, it changes when it gets bigger. It's the same, everything's the same, but it's bigger, and you have a different field of vision to see that. So you've got to keep that together and make whatever little changes you need to make the big one work, so it's not an exact rendering of the drawing. Oh, yes.
Hi.
Oh, yes.
So tell us what's your favorite music, and also what's your golden hour? When would you like to work?
I used to work at night a lot. I work on, kind of all day, a little bit in the morning and in the afternoon. Like I said, I had to be real, disciplined to do this show. So I worked a lot in the morning and in the afternoon after my nap. What were you saying?
And then the music?
And the music, I'm a jazz fan. I've always listened to jazz from when I was a teenager. And, I'm...
Hot jazz or cold?
Well, smooth jazz, a little bit of smooth jazz, but I was a follower of the Weather Report and jazz fusion that started in the 70s. And living in Philadelphia all those times, I went to see John McLaughlin and the Mont Vishnu Orchestra, real shows, hard driving music. But all of that structure of music, which is just, I guess, just those 8 notes. And what you can do with that, and that's sort of what I think about. You just have this, I love the squares, whatever you can do with that single shape differently every time. That's what I try to do. I like music, but I do listen to that one. My new favorite band, and we've been talking about this, where I've been staying with my friends over here, Tokyo Groove. And Tokyo Groove is a group of really young Japanese jazz players, and they're just amazing. If you just hear the music and you don't see who they are, you would not think that that's who they are when you see them. It's really good stuff.
So you always stay productive, no matter whether you have show or you don't have shows?
Yes, more or less. Yeah, more or less. Yeah. I'm always thinking, I'm always working. I have a big archive of work, pretty much everything that I've been able to save. And I go back through that, sometimes to evaluate. I'm never afraid to work on something that I started literally, 30 or 40 years ago. Just, and go back and, I could do something more with that. So it's all one kind of, once the work is all done, then everything becomes, subject matter in one way or another for the next thing. So I didn't really have to think of what to do with the show. I just had to think of how to do it and to change it enough. But working on that base of everything that was before that. And even the stippling and the pointillism part of this work relates to photography, which I had that parallel career in, as grain that you have when you have a black and white photograph and you blow it up. You can see the stippling in it. So that's, that's a little bit of a stretch, but, with stippling, in a small stippling drawing, you can almost make that, if it's tight enough, you can make that seem like a photograph, just for the shading and stuff.
But if you enlarge it, and then usually...
Then it becomes pointillism,
Yeah.
it becomes something like this, so I really had to keep working till I can get real balance of the light part to the dark part, and I can get that feeling of
That brings the
dimension.
light. Yeah.
Any other questions for David? Yeah.
You said geometry was one of the things you latched onto at school. You do any measuring or start at a golden ratio or anything with these, or is it like freehand in your drawing process?
It's freehand, but I do a lot of drawings on graphic paper and a lot of freehand drawing. I like the freehand, but the graphic paper I use just to get a straighter line and to really kind of get things focused. And occasionally with some of my other work, the landscape work with the beaches and things like that, where I do have a horizon line, I'll do a straight edge across it just to get it to kind of rough it in a little bit. But most of this is all freehand. But I do use some all sticks on, keep it steady. A lot of this is just interacting, it's going to go back. I have to get up closer and have a steady hand. So I've got the old mall stick I made back in about 76, I think.
Next time you're looking for a title, don't forget you said maniacs.
Oh, I did? Well, I'm a low talking number. Usually I say that before I even start talking.
It's going to
I think with
be,
this microphone.
it's going to be recorded, so you could.
Look back at it, yes. Get
Yeah, don't you put this on YouTube?
Oh, yeah.
I might steal it.
Okay, no, you can steal. I steal stuff all the time. People, artists learn from other artists. Steal from other artists all the time. I like to do that, but as subtly as possible, sort of like a pickpocket. And borrow that.
Well, David, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure, and the work is beautiful.
Oh, well, thank you.